The Monsters Ring, Chapter 10, Russell to the Rescue. Russell cried out in terror and flung himself to the ground, ready to roll in an attempt to extinguish the flames, but as quickly as they began, they died away. He lay there for a moment, too stunned to think. Then a stray beam of moonlight struck his hand, and he gasped at what he saw. The strange change in his skin. Yet the moonlight itself seemed to calm him, offer him new strength. He pushed himself to his knees, then slowly rose to his feet, stretching his arms to the beckoning silver circle above him. And if there had been a monster before, Russell Craniker was a king among monsters now. His entire body was covered with overlapping red scales that gleamed with burnished metal. His wings stretched tall behind him, their peaks and points looming against the night. And in his eyes, there burned a fire that could freeze a man with fear. He beat his fists against his chest, then extended his wings, flapped them twice, and floated up into the air. Even though it was his own strength that lifted him, Russell felt an instant of panic. It was as if he had been plucked from earth, was being carried away by some giant winged beast. Except the beast was him. The panic gave way to a surge of delight. Working the wings with his powerful shoulder muscles, he rose into the night, into the deep black heavens. The ground shrank away as he drew level with the treetops. He continued to rise on and up toward the mysterious moon. I wonder how high I can go, he thought, then decided to find out. But when he had soared about 300 feet, he looked down and suddenly felt as if he had taken a dive to the biggest roller coaster in the world. His stomach began begging for mercy. He dropped back to about 100 feet, then began to glide lazily over the town. He found it deeply satisfying to be flying through the air under his own power. The silence, no sound, save the wind of his wings, made it seem as if he had entered another world, separate from the one that drifted below him, so very far away. Passing over the high school, Russell was attracted by the bonfire. 300 or 400 costumed children looking like beetles milled about, happily guzzling cider and gobbling donuts. With a roar, Russell swooped down toward them. He was rewarded with a flurry of exclamations, pointing, and screamings. Just as quickly, he soared away again, over the top of the school, leaving them wondering but happy. Most of them would remember this Halloween as the best of their lives. A few blocks past the school, Russell suddenly spotted 4 figures, 3 large ones and a smaller one struggling wildly. Eddie and his teenage attackers. Russell had forgotten them in the heat of his transformation, but it is clear that Eddie was in big trouble, and despite all the bullying Eddie had done to him in the past, 3 against 1 stuck in Russell's throat. Without giving him time to think, his monster side snapped into action. First came an ear-splitting roar, thundering through the night. It spun the teenagers around. Their eyes bulged with horror, as if they were seeing the end of the world. Actually, as far as they were concerned, they were. For as Russell flew toward them, he looked like nothing so much as death on wings, descending now to claim them. "Move!" screamed one. Dropping Eddie, they raced for safety. That should have been enough. Eddie was out of danger, but Russell, hunting spirit, was aroused. He shot after the older boys like an arrow from a bow. Working his huge bat-like wings, he sped along a mere 5 feet above the pavement. His blood pounded through his veins, afire with the joy of the chase. An instant later, he closed on the boy in the rear. "Gotcha!" snarled Russell as he caught the teenager under the arms with his claws. Changing direction, he headed straight up. "Help!" screamed his captive. "Let me down, let me down!" He squirmed and began to kick wildly. "Careful!" growled Russell, "or I might drop you." Then he chuckled. The frightened teenager looked down. They were at least 100 feet above the street. He stopped kicking. Russell, thrilled with the strength in his usually puny arms, continued to rise. Soon they were higher than the tallest building in the town. The land had become like a map beneath them. The houses, small boxes, the streets, little lines. The moon sparkled on the river and on the west edge of town. Russell swooped toward the black and silver water. "How'd you like a bath?" he asked, remembering how the boys had threatened Eddie. The memory triggered another idea. As long as he was at it, maybe he ought to give Eddie a good scare. Not hurt him, as these jokers had intended. Just educate him a little. Suddenly he had lost interest in the rowdy dangling from his talons. "Remember this next time you decide to pick on someone," Russell growled, swooping even lower. He dropped the boy in the mud at the river's edge. The teenager made a satisfying sploosh as he landed. Russell rose again, banked in a sharp curve, and zoomed back toward where he had left Eddie. He wasn't there. It took Russell a few minutes, but searching was easier when you could fly. He soon located his old nemesis cowering in the back entrance of the high school, a glazed expression on his face. Russell landed about 15 feet in front of him. "There you are," he said in a booming tone. "I've been looking for you." Eddie jumped up, pressing himself against the locked door. "Get away from me! Get away, you monster!" "Be quiet," snarled Russell. "Right," said Eddie. "Anything you say." He was so tight against the door, he looked as if he was trying to squeeze through the keyhole. "Now listen," said Russell. "You've been picking on a friend of mine, and I want it to stop." Eddie looked blank. "Who?" he asked at last. "Russell Craniker. I want you to leave him alone." The look on Eddie's face changed to pure astonishment. Russell bared his fangs, hissing as he did it. "Right," said Eddie quickly. "I leave him alone, and you leave me alone, right?" "You've got it," said Russell. "But don't forget, or..." He paused, looking for a stern enough threat, but finally ended with, "or you'll be very, very sorry." It seemed to do the trick. "I won't," whimpered Eddie. I promise." Roaring with laughter, Russell flapped his wings and soared back to the night sky. He flew until he was out of Eddie's sight, then settled beside a tree in Stearns Park. He was still chuckling. Frightening Eddie like that was the most satisfying thing he had ever done. Now to change back and test Eddie's resolution to leave him alone. He grasped the ring, as before. It was hard to turn, but its claws were strong. He twisted it on his finger, said the familiar words, and waited. Nothing happened. Dum dum dum.